This is one thing that we had in the program, and that I know you and I wanted to talk about, but just out of curiosity, big goaltenders versus small goaltenders. You're a big guy, 6'4", almost 6'5". I know we've talked in private just about how, like, your goalie right now at Michigan Tech, where you goalie coach for, Blake Pietila, best goalie in the NCAA. He's a short guy, only 5'10", struggling to get interest and get offers for pro. Big goalies, small goalies. Why are there no small goalies in the professional hockey ranks?
Yeah, so this is a very emotionally driven topic because it is disappointing for a lot of younger goalies because it seems like the bar has been set so high or it's unattainable. And so everything I do, I try to come at things with evidence and rationale and like, try not to be emotionally charged. So being a goalie is the premise of being a goalie is very simple. It's take up the most amount of net. So a taller goalie will automatically take up the most amount of net. Okay, so that just is what it is. Then there are people who will say like, oh, well, taller goalies are always slow, or taller goalies always use their body. And I think that's a weird kind of like fallacy where it's just like people in their brains think that. So ultimately, if a tall goalie is up here, so if you're listening, one hand's higher than the other. So if a tall goalie is up here and a smaller goalie is up here, in order to bridge the gap in terms of the amount of net taking up, the smaller goalie needs to be significantly better at every aspect of their game in order to bridge that gap. Whereas a tall goalie maybe doesn't have to be as good of a skater or as good of a tracker because they're just naturally taking up size. So you look at like someone like Robin Lehner, successful NHL career, big goalie, not the greatest skater, really good athlete, and that's okay. But then you look at, and then people will always be like, well, look at Jusse Saros and Dustin Wolf, they're small. Have you ever watched those guys play? They are so much better at everything than every other goalie, and that's what allows them to be able to succeed at that level. And that's okay. So if you're a smaller goalie, instead of, feeling sorry for yourself, you have to work to build everything from skating, flexibility, to tracking, to reading the play. Every single attribute a goalie can have, you have to be better than a taller goalie at it. And that is just the reality. Just like if you're going to play in the NBA, if you're 6'3", you're going to have a hard time playing in the NBA unless you're like Steph Curry, who is absolutely money. And that's just the reality of it because you have an advantage. You have a physical advantage, so you have to be able to bridge that. And sorry if you're small. Like, you don't have to get mad at us. You talk to your parents. But that just is what it is. So it's not impossible for a smaller goalie to play at a high level. You just have to be very good at everything.
It's going to be one of the scariest things, though, the fact that a guy like Steph Curry, basically you or me at 6'3", 6'4", or in my case 6'5", we would be considered average, short, if anything, to play in the NBA. Meanwhile, we'd be short. We'd be short guys. We'd be too. Imagine that, me sitting down with Mark Cuban and him saying, listen, Trav, you're a little bit too short. You can't play on the team. Try to get a little bit bigger. Maybe put on some weight. Like, just mind-boggling. But back to the goaltending side of things, less than 5% of all men on this earth are 6'2" or taller. And that accounts for 90% of all the jobs in professional hockey. So to say, why do short guys not get the opportunity? Majority of every single goalie on the planet fits under that description of being a short goalie, but they're accounting for almost none of the jobs when they're most of the population. And I know you and I have talked about this just privately. Why would you take the same goalie at 5'10" when you can get the exact same thing at 6'4", at 6'5"? I can teach, let's say me, I'm by far from being the world's greatest goalie, but you can teach me to get in the right spot and get hit with pucks, as opposed to a small guy. You may already know that, but I can't make you bigger. You can't teach size. I know it's an old school dinosaur saying, but it's so true. You cannot teach size. You can teach goaltending, but not size
and that's
or reach.
Yeah, and so when you look at like high level goalies, like professional level goalies, so like Division I and like just good goalies, pro goalies, the skill level between them is very, very thin. The margin of difference is very thin. So if you have two goalies that are equal or about equal in skill, what is the differentiating factor? Height. And so you take a taller goalie because everything in terms of professional sports, or the NHL at least, is potential. Who has the most potential to be successful? You can teach someone to skate. You can teach someone to track. You can build someone's ability to read the play. You cannot make someone physically taller. And so that's why the game is going that way. And it is an advantage for tall goalies, but smaller goalies is not like impossible. And the one thing I tell like all the small goalies I work with is small goalies succeed in Division I hockey and call NCAA hockey. So if you're a small goalie, you still have a great opportunity to play high level college hockey. And then after that, shoot your shot, whether that's going to Europe or trying to make it in pro. It's not impossible. It is more difficult. Yeah, goalie science guy. So it's actually plugged to the podcast. I do run a podcast called Goalie Science with a partner who's a doctor of chiropractic medicine. And is it an epidemic? I think so. And so I know in the podcast you had last week or whenever, a week ago when we're recording this, you guys had talked about how the butterfly had kind of caused all this. And it kind of is true. And so when it comes to like hip surgery and like FAI and stuff, some people are going to be naturally more prone to a cam or pincer or a mixed lesion or impingement. And that's just life. But when you look at goaltending, there's an excessive amount of internal rotation, so your hip rotating internally or towards the midline, and that's not the greatest position for your hips. It's not something like in physical therapy that we recommend you spend a lot of time in. But in goaltending, you have to do it. And it's that plus the amount of force that the joints take over the cumulative period of time. And there's something, I believe it's Wolff's Law, I might have misquoted, but it essentially says that your bones are going to form to the demands that you place on them. So if you're a young goalie, you start being a goalie at like 7, 8, you're still growing. Your bones, for the most part, are I wouldn't say malleable, but they're going to adapt to the demands that are put on them. So being a butterfly and doing, T-push, shuffles, RVHs, butterflies for years and years and years there's no evidence yet because no one's ever studied it, but you could assume that it probably increases the likelihood of getting an impingement just because of the demands you put in your hip. And there's a great study out of Tobias Werner out of Sweden where he's probably the best goalie researcher we have right now, but he looked at SHL, Svensken, I think Division 1, as well as the top 2 women's leagues. And basically it was like a 33% chance that your starting goalie is going to be injured at some point in the year with hip or groin problems. And it's just the position of sport. It's just like, why do pitchers always have to get Tommy Johns or have something wrong with their elbows? Because they're throwing repetitively. And so if your position or your sport requires something that's potentially harmful or dangerous, you're gonna have a lot of injuries. And that's just the nature of goaltending. And I know you had mentioned something about like an elevated knee block into butterflies. And I was listening to it while driving and I was like trying to take my hands off the wheel and I'm trying to like balance it out. I don't know what the solution is. The solution ultimately is like that we have right now is basically load management, not going too crazy in terms of how often we're having kids skate, butterfly, and all these sorts of things, and being able to have kids play like multiple positions and not specialize in goaltending from a super early age is probably the best defense we have against it. But there's a lot of things in it, so multifactorial that it's difficult to say what it is, but you are right, and you were a victim of it, whether that was just because you played for a while or you're just genetics, but that is what we see. Although I can say anecdotally, I am seeing more and more younger goalies being 12, 14, 13, 14, complaining of serious hip problems and then needing surgery. And I think that is more the issue, was these younger goalies are having a lot of pain and a lot of issues.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate where I have found ways to kind of get around the impingement and the surgery that was needed for the last couple of years. Unfortunately, mobility and stretching only take you so far, and then you get to a point where, okay, well, you're going to need steroids, and okay, that only takes you so far, and then it's like, well, I got to take some load management off and do less reps and be more, protective of what I'm actually using my hip for. And then it just gets to the point where, where I got to in December and January this year, where it's like, I physically cannot do this anymore. I'm sorry. I've given you everything in the tank. We're running on fumes. I need to get this fixed. And, I know I'm only one apple in the study. And unfortunately, nobody in the community wants to talk about this because it's so oh my God, you got hip surgery. You're broken. But everybody's going through this. I was talking to an NHL goalie the other day and he's like, dude, there's an epidemic. Every single goalie in this league needs surgery. The league doesn't care about us. They have us wearing these little paper thin knee stacks, these pants that force you to torque even more over into the RVH, especially when, like we mentioned, every goalie's 6'3", 4, and 5. You got these huge shins. You got to crank all the way over to seal the post properly with the best shooters in the world. It's an absolute epidemic going on. But like these big guys are being set up to fail just because of like the demand being put on our bodies. I think too. One of the guys in the goalie community, I know you're not the biggest fan of him, but I've talked to my trainer about him. Shout out Brian Collins. There's a guy in the goalie community by the name of Goalie Force. I think he played some pro in Finland or whatever it was. But he makes these outrageous claims that you can't be a pro unless you can do the splits. You can't be a pro unless you can do a wide butterfly and sealed post to post. And listen, buddy, I would love nothing more than to be able to do a full Andre Vasilevsky splits or steal the post, post to post in a reverse like a Bobrovsky or like a Spencer Martin. But like some people are physically not able. I don't have those genetics. Yes, my surgeon helped me get a little bit closer, but making these claims that if you can't do this, you're never going to play pro or you're a failure, like absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back before we get into that part, but like in terms of the FAI, or femoral acetabular impingement, there's a lot of good research coming out, or like Dr. John Schneider out of Resolve Physio in Ohio does like a really good hip management course for physical therapists. And one of the things, like when you look at the studies, is around almost the majority of people with FAI really don't have pain or impingement. So like a lot of times, like I'll have kids message me and be like, "Hey, the doctor said I have FAI," and I go, "Well, are you in pain?" They go, "No." "Is your range of motion limited?" "No." You don't have to worry about it. But that minority that you fell into are symptomatic, and you did whatever you can, and sometimes surgical management is the only option. There's definitely a ton of things you can do beforehand, and like in terms of managing your game. But yeah, sometimes it is. But the vast majority of people with FAI are asymptomatic. And yeah, like getting into the goalie force thing, like I've been blocked for a long time, so I don't really know what goes on. And you know what? Like I don't know him. Maybe he's a great guy. I've actually seen one of my goalies does train with him, and in terms of goalie coaching, he probably is really good, and that's fine. But for me, as someone who is a professional, I'm going to be working in the medical profession. I'm a big believer in scope of practice, meaning that if you're a strength coach, you should stick to being a strength coach. If you are a goalie coach, you should stick to being a goalie coach. Like I'm very open to the fact that I'm not a mental coach, and when goalies ask me about mindset and these things, I just say I don't know. Here's someone that does. And with him, like you know what? If you have a training program or a mobility program, that's okay. But to say things that are objectively wrong, meaning that you're just completely ignoring science and basic anatomy, and saying things that could potentially be harmful to kids, that's where I get an issue, and that's why I called them out, because like as someone who's a future physical therapist, I have a duty and a role to help people maintain health. It comes to dumb exercises and things, and if it's not going to hurt you, you can do whatever you want. You're not going to know an exercise is dumb until you make mistakes. Or if you're an adult, if you're 20, 30, and you want to do things that potentially put you at risk, that's okay. You're an adult. You have that prerogative. But to do things that could just say and promote things that potentially could hurt children, that's an absolute no for me, and that's you shouldn't do that, because that's honestly it's unethical. And if I'd spoken to him before I was blocked, and he had said that he believes that one's ability to stretch through the pain and discomfort is an indicator of how hard they're willing to work. And
hey, more hockey content. It might be old, it might be new, it might be a full episode, it might be a half episode, but you can click these boxes, because who doesn't like clicking boxes?